All right, so let's dive into a case that has fascinated and perplexed people for decades. We're going to the coast of Massachusetts, to Provincetown, and we're going to try to unravel the mystery of the Lady of the Dunes, a case that went unsolved for almost 50 years.
Yeah, it really is intriguing, right? It's a case that just stayed cold for so long, and there are so many unsettling details and dead ends, almost like stepping into a real-life mystery.
It really is. It all started back in the summer of '74, July 26th to be exact.
Huh.
A young girl is walking her dog, along the Race Point Dunes, enjoying the sun, when she stumbles across a horrifying sight.
And what's really disturbing is not just the brutality of the crime scene, but the fact that the killer went to great lengths to conceal the victim's identity. It adds this chilling layer of premeditation to the whole case.
Yeah, it's like this was not some random act of violence, so let's take a closer look. The victim, she was found face down on a beach towel, completely nude, almost decapitated. And both of her hands, along with one forearm, were missing.
You can imagine the challenge for investigators back then. No fingerprints, no easy way to identify her using dental records. It was like the killer had meticulously erased any trace of who she was.
It's wild. But there were these, curious details left behind, almost like the killer was taunting investigators. There was a blue bandana and a pair of Wrangler jeans placed neatly beneath her head. A gold-flecked hair tie, like the kind used for a ponytail. And her toenails, they were painted pink.
And those details, while they seem small, they offered a glimmer of hope. They hinted at a life lived, personality, relationships. Investigators hoped these clues could lead them to her identity, but for years, they led nowhere.
Yeah, it's crazy. The police, though, they were determined. They investigated thousands of missing person reports, checked car registrations, chased down every lead. But each path just seemed to evaporate into thin air.
And even the crime scene itself presented challenges. The sand and the towel beneath the body, undisturbed, indicating that the body was transported to the dunes, deliberately placed there. It raises the stakes, right? This wasn't a crime of passion, it was calculated.
Totally. And so, with each passing year, the Lady of the Dunes became more than just a case file. She transformed into a haunting local legend, a story whispered around campfires, retold in hushed tones. What do you think fueled this fascination, besides the obvious mystery of it all?
I think it's the lack of answers, the unanswered questions. It creates a void, and we as humans, we instinctively try to fill it. Theories emerge, speculation runs wild, and the case just takes on a life of its own in the public imagination.
And this case had its fair share of theories, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Let's dive into some of the more prominent ones that circulated for years.
Okay, so some people, they whispered about organized crime, maybe a hit orchestrated by Whitey Bulger. Others speculated about serial killers, like Tony Costa. He was active in the area at the time. And then there's this intriguing, albeit far-fetched theory linking the case to the filming of Jaws, which was happening on nearby Martha's Vineyard.
It's amazing how these theories, even though they were unsubstantiated, they captured people's attention for years. Why do you think certain theories, even if they seem implausible, gain so much traction?
I think it's that inherent human desire to make sense of the unknown. Especially when we're faced with something as unsettling as an unsolved murder, we latch onto any information, any potential connection, just to try and impose order on chaos. I think sometimes the scarier or more outlandish a theory is, the more it resonates with our deepest fears.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like the mob connection. It plays into our anxieties about powerful hidden forces, right? Operating beyond the reach of the law. And the Jaws link, it taps into our fascination with pop culture and its potential influence on real life. It's almost like we prefer a dramatic explanation, even if it's fictional, to the unsettling reality of a mystery without an easy answer.
Right. It's like we are looking for that missing puzzle piece. And in this case was rife with those attempts to explain the unexplainable. But, each theory after scrutiny, it unraveled. The mob connection lacked concrete evidence. Tony Costa, he actually died before the Lady of the Dunes was even discovered. And that Jaws extra theory, it just didn't hold water.
There was one chilling lead, though. A known serial killer named Hedden Clark. He confessed to the crime. It seemed like a major break in the case.
But Clark had a history of severe mental illness, and he was known to fabricate stories. It cast a lot of doubt on his confession. There were inconsistencies, and it couldn't be corroborated. It seemed like the case was destined to remain unsolved.
So for almost 40 years, the Lady of the Dunes remained this nameless ghost, haunting the shores of Provincetown. But then, in 2022, there's this groundbreaking development, and it changes everything. Tell me more about that.
This is where science and technology come in. The FBI, They used this revolutionary technique called genetic genealogy, and they were finally able to identify the Lady of the Dunes. It sent shockwaves through the true crime world. After decades of anonymity, she had a name: Ruth Marie Terry.
Ruth Marie Terry. It's amazing how a name, something so fundamental to our identity, can be lost for so long and then boom, reclaimed with such profound impact. But before we jump into Ruth's story, I'm really curious about this genetic genealogy. Can you explain how it works, like in simple terms, and why it's been so impactful in solving cold cases?
Sure, so think of your DNA as a blueprint. It contains this unique code that's passed down through generations. Genetic genealogy uses this code to trace your family tree, connecting you to relatives you may never have even known existed.
So in Ruth's case, investigators took her DNA and used it to build a family tree, eventually leading them to living relatives who could confirm her identity.
Exactly. And what's amazing is that genetic genealogy, it can be used even with degraded DNA samples, like the kind you often find at old crime scenes. It's like opening a window into the past, a path to answers that were once thought to be lost forever.
It's really incredible how technology is changing how we solve crimes and bring closure to families.
It's a game changer, for sure. And in Ruth's case, it didn't just give her back her name, it opened up this new chapter in the investigation. And the focus shifted to a key figure in her life: her husband, Guy Moldavin.
So with Ruth Marie Terry finally identified, the investigation takes this dramatic turn.
Now that we know that the Lady of the Dunes was Ruth Marie Terry, we gotta look at her husband, Guy Moldavin, right? And what we find out about this guy is, well, unsettling, to say the least.
It's wild, right? I mean, after Ruth's identification, it's like this man with this dark past just materialized out of thin air. How did he manage to stay under the radar for so long?
It really makes you think about how cunning some people can be, you know? Like a chameleon, adapting, deceiving. And remember, this was way before the internet and social media. People could disappear, reinvent themselves much easier than they can today.
That's a good point. It was a different world back then. So let's rewind a bit. What do we know about Moldavin's early life before he met Ruth?
Well, a lot of the details are kind of fragmented, which honestly is a bit telling in itself. We know he was born in 23, raised in an orphanage. He later adopted the name Rockwell, adding another layer to his already kind of fluid identity.
It's like he was constantly trying to outrun his past, don't you think? Erase it somehow. And does that carry over into his relationship?
Absolutely. This pattern of running, of leaving chaos behind him, it seems to define his relationships with women. He was married at least 4 times, and each marriage is marked by accusations of abuse, financial manipulation, and even disappearance.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. His first marriage was in 46 to a woman named Jolyn May Loop. They lived in California, then later Washington. He worked as a DJ. They divorced in 56. On the surface, it seems pretty, well, normal. What stands out to you here?
It's what happens next that's interesting. Just 2 years later, using the name Raoul Guy Rockwell, he marries Manzanita Aileen Ryan in Idaho. Manzanita, or Manzi, as she was known, had an 18-year-old daughter from a previous marriage, Dolores Ann Mearns. And this is where things take a really dark turn.
Right, because this is where the story intersects with another unsolved mystery. Manzi and Dolores vanish without a trace on New Year's Eve, 1960. And of course, Guy Moldavin becomes the prime suspect.
Exactly. He flees Seattle, but is later caught by the FBI for unlawful flight to avoid testifying in their disappearance. But get this, he's never actually charged with their murders. The prosecutor at the time didn't want to move forward without a body.
He essentially gets away with it. It's unbelievable how we just slipped through the cracks.
At least for a while. Don't forget, we're talking about the early 60s. Forensic technology wasn't nearly as advanced as it is today. But wait, there's more. Before the investigation into Manzi and Dolores is even finished, Moldavin marries another woman, Evelyn Marie Emerson.
Didn't he marry Evelyn twice?
You're right. He marries her in 1960 and again in 1963. And what's even crazier is that he's accused of stealing around $10,000 from her family while still married to her. He ends up convicted of grand larceny and sentenced to 15 years. But get this, the sentence is suspended as long as he repays the money.
He basically buys his way out of jail. This guy's like a cat with 9 lives.
It's like he thought he was invincible. And then, a few years later, in 74, he meets and marries Ruth Marie Terry in Reno, Nevada. Less than 6 months later, she's found murdered in Provincetown.
You mentioned a pattern earlier, right? Marriage followed by violence or disappearance. It's chilling to see it play out again and again. Do you think there could be other victims out there? Other women caught in his web?
It's a haunting thought, isn't it? I mean, we have these confirmed cases of disappearance and murder, but considering his personality, his history of escaping consequences, it's impossible to rule out the possibility of more victims. Their story's still untold.
It's scary to think about the extent of his potential crimes, especially considering how long he avoided justice. And his death in 2002 just adds another layer of complexity to all of this.
Definitely. He died at home in Salinas, California, of what his obituary called a long illness, very vague. He left behind a fourth wife, Phyllis, and a sister, Joan. But what really struck me is how his obituary painted this, well, sanitized picture of his life, like almost idyllic.
It's like someone was trying to control his image even after he was gone. Tell me more about that.
Well, the obituary describes him as a buyer for a department store, an artist, an actor, even a poet. There's no mention of the multiple marriages, the disappearances, the convictions, the accusations, nothing.
It's just such a contrast to what we now know. It's like he lived two completely separate lives. One he presented to the world, and one hidden in darkness.
Exactly. And that's what makes this case so fascinating and so disturbing. It reminds us that evil often looks normal, that dangerous predators can hide in plain sight.
It's definitely a sobering thought. Even though Moldavan is gone, the search for answers continues. I mean, what happened to Manzi and Dolores? Did they meet the same fate as Ruth?
Sadly, we might never know for sure. But the evidence we do have, along with Moldavan's pattern of behavior, suggests that it wasn't good. And the fact that he never faced justice for their disappearances just makes this already complex case even more tragic.
It's a reminder that justice isn't always served quickly, that some mysteries just linger. But even without all the answers, I think there's value in continuing to explore these cases, to give a voice to the victims, to hold on to the hope that the truth will come out someday. It's crazy to think that the same technology that finally gave Ruth Marie Terry her name back also exposed just how awful Guy Moldavan really was.
It shows you that the truth always finds a way out, right? Secrets might be buried, but they have a way of coming to light no matter how much time passes.
It makes you wonder, what else did he take to his grave? Are there other cases out there, unsolved, that could be connected to him?
A lot of investigators are asking themselves that same question right now. Actually, they're looking into a possible link between Moldavan and a double homicide from way back in June of 1950, Humboldt County, California. A young couple, Henry Baird and Barbara Jo Kelly, vanished after a night out. Sadly, Henry Baird was found dead the next day on a beach, shot in the back of the head. Barbara Jo Kelly, though, she was never found.
Oh, that's awful. What's the connection to Moldavan in this case?
Well, at the time of those murders, Moldavan was living in the area and working as a cook at a restaurant owned by his father-in-law at the time. And here's the thing. Barbara Jo Kelly worked at another restaurant in town, and both of those restaurants were on Henry Baird's delivery route. It's a pretty chilling coincidence, to say the least.
Right, the more we learn, the more disturbing it gets. It's hard to grasp how one person could be behind so much pain. It really makes you wonder if I'll ever really know the full extent of what he did.
Some secrets might stay buried with him. But I think it's important for us to learn to recognize the signs, the red flags, the things that might point to someone being a predator. If we understand those warning signs, we can be more aware and protect ourselves and others.
Yeah, I agree. What are some of those red flags that you think are important for people to know about?
Well, in Moldavan's case, you see a pattern of manipulation, financial exploitation, violence, especially towards women. He was really good at deceiving people, constantly reinventing himself, and leaving a trail of destruction behind him.
It's scary because he seems so normal. It reminds us to trust our gut feelings and be wary of people who act that way.
Definitely. This case is a reminder that we can't be naive. Tragedy can happen anywhere, at any time.
As we wrap up our deep dive today, I can't stop thinking about that girl walking her dog on the dunes, stumbling onto something that would change so many lives. It reminds you that even in beautiful places, darkness can exist.
And that sometimes the mysteries that stay with us the longest are the ones that hit closest to home. The Lady of the Dunes, she wasn't just a nameless victim. She was someone's daughter, maybe a mother, a wife. And even though her story ended tragically, the fight to get her justice, to give her back her name and her identity, shows how strong the human spirit can be. It proves that we won't let the darkness win.
Well said. I think we'll leave our listeners with this. What secrets are hidden right in front of us, in our own lives, our communities? What can we do together and on our own to bring those secrets into the light and make sure justice is served, even if it takes a long time? Keep exploring, keep asking questions.